Welcome back to the Balance Breakdown. UFC Vegas 87 is in the books, and Harry Powell and I are here to break down the card. A lot of hype, lot of criticism of this card. I think before it happened. I think on paper it was a decent card. I think on the night it was an okay card. We'll talk about the main event. It was a little bit of a letdown, all right, but overall, a couple of good performances, a couple of good showings. As I mentioned, Harry Powell is here. Before we get into the fights, I do have to give Harry Powell the floor here because a big moment happened for you over the weekend, Harry, and you were able. So for anybody who doesn't know, when Harry isn't on speaking with me about fights and breaking down fights excellently, he spends a lot of time coaching. He coaches at his gym. He coaches in a university. He shares a lot of his knowledge with students, and I know he's very highly regarded. Balance Grappling is where you'll find his stuff on Instagram. Definitely head over there and check that out. But this weekend, Harry, you had a very special moment. It was one of the first times that you're able to promote one of your students from white belt onto blue belt, and I know it was a big moment for you, and it's a moment that deserves a little bit of insight on what it means to you, because I don't know anybody who works as hard or is as passionate about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and about combat sports in general. And I always appreciate the time that you come on here and spend with me, where you stay up late on Monday nights to record this, but behind the scenes the real work is happening with your own development as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist, but also you kind of transgressing over to be a coach and having people underneath you, and how well you are regarded based off everything that I see on Instagram. All of that accumulated into a special moment for you this weekend, and that was the chance that you got to give one of your students and promote them from a white belt to a blue belt.
Jesus, I didn't know we were going to cry on this fucking podcast. What are we doing? Yeah. So I coach at a uni as you mentioned. I started that at the start of last year. There's an interesting crop of people in there. Some of them cross over between the gym that I train at, London Grapple, and the uni gym, and there was one lady who specifically just had been coming on leaps and bounds in the last sort of 6 months or so. And there was a competition this weekend on Saturday that had been organised by the uni that I coach at. And it was one of those like intervarsity type, any uni can come in and do whatever. And the way that the female divisions are set up is quite difficult in that there's just not many female competitors. There just really isn't many female competitors. And so the division that the lady that I promoted, her name is Elvie, the lady that I promoted, she was in the over 55 category. Her first match was against somebody who was probably 82 kilos, and she managed to win that match. And then she had another match, which was against one of her training partners, which she was really unhappy at having to take. But she managed to win that one too. And then in the final, there was a little bit of controversy where the ref didn't score some sweet points, and she got taken down, and the whole thing. And
that's why you're a little bit hoarse today, I think, is it?
Yeah. So what we did eventually is we made it like ADCC. So the gym we hosted it in London Grapple, and the gym was split into 2 mats. So there was 2 brackets running at all times, and then for the final we just had 1 massive mat. And so there was just me screaming already with a voice gone, but there was me screaming my student through her finals match, and she managed to pull it back from, I think she was 2 down. She managed to win 6-2 in the end. And I'd spoken to the head coach of London Grapple about giving her a belt if she won, and the condition was if she won her bracket. And she managed to pull it out, and obviously she didn't know anything about it. And there was just there was a really, really beautiful moment where obviously she was the last match of the entire day. There's the whole sort of the build up. The day had been very long. I'd been coaching for 7 hours at that point, and she managed to pull it off and win her bracket. And on the scheme of things, this is just a small university intervarsity comp, right? But for those students on the day, and equally for me as a coach, this is my first competition ever coaching a set of students that I've taken from sort of nothing to something. it was it means a lot. It means a lot. There's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes, as you mentioned, and there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of time, there's a lot of effort that goes into trying to raise those students, because at the end of the day, they're not going to be in university forever, but their interactions with the sport will either allow them to continue on in whatever sort of pasture life takes them in after uni, or it won't. And so I hold a really, really large responsibility in that I want to make sure that these students get the best that they absolutely can do. And yeah, it was just so, it was like a fucking film. It really was like a fucking film. The whole day, it was so long. Some students did amazingly well. Some students were disappointed in their performances. And then, Elvie started her bracket at 2 p.m. or whatever, and it was 7 p.m. and her bracket was finishing and we were getting to it. And the last match of the whole day, the whole gym was fucking rammed because, everyone might as well stay to the end to watch the whole thing. And the little controversy and the everything else, and she manages to pull it out. I think she got her final pass with 19 seconds left on the clock or something. And just
unbelievable. And it's great credit to you, Harry. I know you put a lot of time and a lot of dedication, a lot of focus on yourself, but also the years of focus that you have put on yourself. Now your students get that level of focus as well. And I know how hard you work. I know how much it means to you. And I was very delighted when you sent me that message over the weekend just to kind of share the moment with me. I felt it was important enough to share with everybody else, anyone who does listen to the Balance Breakdown and likes Harry's stuff. He's just as good as coach as he is at breaking down fights, and that's exactly what we're going to do right now. And yeah, I hate to bring it down, Harry, but let's talk about Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Shamil Gaziev in the main event of the UFC Vegas card. A fight that drew a lot of criticism, really, to be honest. And it's harsh but fair at the same time to criticize a fight before it happens, but it seems the criticism was justified at the end. We were critical of the situation of some of the fights on this card, and we would be critical for moments like this. Now, it didn't take fully away from the card, but it definitely gave the card a little bit of a flat tire, and it was somewhat a non-event really in the main event, wasn't it?
Look, the way I can sum up this fight was Shamil Gaziev didn't have the gas tank to compete for 5 rounds. It didn't seem as though he had the gas tank to compete for 3 rounds. And Jairzinho Rozenstruik knew, I think from very, very early on, that he didn't need to do a lot to win. And so chose to take a back seat, chose to play a more passive, very safe, right? Don't get me wrong. As we have said ad nauseum, as a fighter, your main objective is to win. Doesn't matter how you win, you just have to win. And so, full credit to Jairzinho Rozenstruik for taking the path of least resistance. He got his paycheck. He got his second paycheck at the end of the night. Fair play to him. At the end of the day, this is still heavyweight MMA. He's still got a family to feed. And, at any moment, any of these big boys can be dangerous. However,
I was glad I thought I said, geez, I'm after softening them up now with that opening to the podcast. However, give it to me.
Optically, it was absolute garbage. If you have a man that after 5 minutes of fighting, especially when he gets you into the place where you want to be, where, Shamil Gaziev managed to hit a lovely, frankly. The only nice thing I can say about the fight is that high crotch when he eventually got there was very nice, frankly. Shot him up against the cage, got to that single leg, got to the high crotch, dumped him, beautiful. And then just laid on him for a minute. That's exactly where Shamil Gaziev wanted to be, was on top of Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and he did absolutely nothing with the position. Absolutely fucking nothing. And it bollocksed him that much that for the rest of the 3 rounds he had left in the tank, he did even less than nothing. He was spitting his gum shield out in order to get rest time. He was hanging his gum. At one thought, I thought his gums had fallen off, and then I realized,
I was like, what the hell is going on? That mouth guard was red, and I was like, what's going on here?
Right. And so,
but look sorry, go ahead, finish, please.
It's all over the shop, right? And if Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who has a long storied kickboxing career as well as an MMA career, when a fighter doesn't want to be in there. When a fighter's gassed. When a fighter doesn't have anything to offer you. And the fact that you still do not choose to go out and finish the fight, the fact that you still choose to just jab this fella's face off, throwing like 11 shots around, is just abysmal. It's absolutely abysmal. I understand, and as I've already made the point, you have to win, and I will stand by that point until the cows come home. But at the end of the day, this is still an entertainment business, and that fight was the least entertaining thing I have seen in a long time.
Yeah, probably since Eric Anders and Pickett, to be honest, but we'll talk about that later on. Look, at a couple of points I have about this is number one, Gaziev wanted to kind of get that high crotch, wanted to get Jairzinho down there, and then he expected to get the fight finished. The problem is the fight didn't finish, and when you are fighting guys like Jairzinho, Rozenstruik, they have enough experience and they've been around long enough in the UFC to kind of know how to guide themselves through moments like that. Number two, this was Gaziev's second fight in the UFC, and in his first fight, we got to see him against Martin Buday, second round at the start. He got the finish. We simply didn't know enough about this guy. And UFC flat out gambled by putting him as the main event here against Rozenstruik. And it completely backfired here. So I don't think a lot of the blame should be going on Gaziev here. Of course he's going to accept a fight in the main event against a guy in Jairzinho Rozenstruik who has a name in the division, but it's the UFC insistence with trying to push certain guys way too soon. And we've seen it time and time again, and we're seeing it even more so nowadays. That is a lot of fighters' detriment, to be honest, because we've seen fighters be treated like that. Edmund Shabazian being the key one, was thrown into the deep end and who has never been the same again. And I feel we have a little bit of increment in that with Gaziev here in Rozenstruik. But look, at Rozenstruik battled through, got the job done, and Gaziev beat himself, really, to be honest. And that was due to a lack of inexperience. That was due to be thrown in the deep end by the UFC in this fight, and to the detriment of the fans, to the card itself, which was decent enough before. This was just a disaster of a main event, and that's not us hating. I think that's just being honest, and sometimes you have to be honest, and I don't like you talking like that, to be honest. I don't like disrespecting the fighters like that, but at the end of the day, we want to see premium level content at the top of a UFC card. And there was a couple of fights on this card, and we'll talk about the flyweight contest where, it has a bit of jeopardy, it has a bit of meaning, it has a chance of maybe somebody going on to fight for a title. Why not just stick that at the main? It doesn't make any difference. Your money is made. Whoever's going to be watching is going to be watching. It doesn't matter that we throw two heavyweights up. Like everyone says, oh, you throw two heavyweights because it captures the imagination of the casual audience, right? And that's true. But when you put two heavyweights in there like that and they produce a fight like that, that's going to take away a casual audience. It's not going to gain anything, to be honest. And that's my 2 cents on that fight. Let's move on to the co-main event. Do you have any fighters for these guys next, or did you even get that far with who you want to see next for these guys, Harry?
Yeah, so I thought for Jairzinho Rozenstruik and for Shamil Gaziev, the fight that I've written for them is the bin.
Exactly. That's it. In the trash. Let's do it. Let's move on to the co-main event, Harry. A little bit more of an intriguing fight here between Vitor Petrino and Tyson Pedro. Interesting stylistic matchup. A lot of questions around Petrino. He went in there and put on a good performance here. Not an excellent performance, but he got the job done against a difficult guy here in Tyson Pedro, didn't he?
He did. And look, again, we talked about this Tyson Pedro being kind of the Jimmy Crute of this division, where if he goes in and he's on, he looks really good. And if he goes in and he's not on against anyone useful, then he gets beat. And that's kind of what we looked at. Petrino looked ginormous. Petrino hits really hard. He's obviously a good athlete. He's quite quick. He's quite dynamic. He's quite athletic in sort of mid-range positions and then in the pocket positions. I thought he was a little bit sloppy when he came to sort of landing the longer combinations. He would sort of chew on his own shots a little bit. He'd sort of ball himself up into his shots a little bit. But over and away, I was impressed with Petrino. Tyson Pedro is still a good fighter. He's still a fighter that's tough to get past. And so we certainly learned a little bit about him. And I also just think for Tyson Pedro specifically, it's a tough matchup when the wrestling isn't working. You know that the guy that you're facing has an okay wrestling base, and then he hits harder than you do. And I think that there was a level of timidity that sort of came in throughout those rounds. And when Petrino did eventually get it down with what eventually was actually a pretty ugly takedown, Pedro really struggled to get back to his feet, and the wrist rides were a problem and the shots were a problem. And he did a good job at surviving in those positions. But yeah, Petrino looked decent. I certainly wouldn't mind seeing him again.
11-0 right now, Harry, for Petrino. How far of a push are we looking to bring him up in the light heavyweight division based off that performance?
So I did kind of want to see the Carlos Ulberg fight. I know that both have sort of been rising at a similar trajectory. And I still kind of want to see the Carlos Ulberg fight. I think Carlos Ulberg is a big hitter, but is far more technical than Petrino. So I would like to see whether Petrino can sort of get that similar engine, that similar level of athleticism, and force somebody like Ulberg to have similar timidity, especially when we know that when Ulberg gets hit, he can sometimes get properly hit, and he stays hit. And that to me is an intriguing fight. But I also don't know whether you want to kill off two potential prospects this early.
I don't. I mean, I understand that sentiment, and we do talk about it sometimes. But let's fucking have these prospects facing off at one another, and let's just see. Like, if you're good enough, you're going to be good enough, or else you go back to the drawing board and you get better. So I'm not against that altogether. Obviously, Tyson Pedro, we're not going to talk about his next fight as of yet. Came out after the fight. And announced his retirement from the sports site. Is, the fact that he is not making enough money to make this sustainable anymore. We're talking about a guy who has 11, 12, 13 fights in the UFC, coming out in a press conference and joking about, saying he's going to have to rob someone to get back home because after taxes and after cuts and everything like that, he gets very, very little. And I know your opinion on this. Is just sad to see. It's just sad to see. Like, it ain't all sunshine and butterflies and rainbows in mixed martial arts. And, we'll come here and we'll wax lyrical about fancy finishes and good cards. But what Tyson Pedro shared with everybody after the fight is the harsh reality of being a mixed martial artist, and not just a mixed martial artist, a mixed martial artist that in the biggest organization and at the highest level, that you can get. And a guy so far into his career and only at 32 years of age is having to throw in the towel because it's not sustainable enough anymore. And I think, we give out about a lot of things, and we complain about a lot of things in mixed martial arts, and we're dealt with another fighter here, Harry, who is being wronged by the pay structure in mixed martial arts.
Look, as you started this card with asking me to be very real, right, and to be actually who I am off camera and talking a bit about myself, and I'll continue that trend, right?
Please do.
MMA has been a significant struggle for me over the last couple of months. It is nothing to do with the SevereMMA people. It is nothing to do with the team that I work for. It is MMA as a sport that has been a struggle for me to stay in, and it is stuff like this that just makes me not want to cover the sport anymore, because what's the point in me having the time or putting the time and putting the effort into analyzing fights when these fighters can't even sustain to put food on their table? I am sitting in a quite nice, quite warm, quite comfortable flat in Southeast London. I'm not putting my body on the line for this. I'm not getting in a cage and fighting Vitor Petrino. It wouldn't be close, by the way, lads. Not even fucking slightly close. But I'm not putting myself into harm's way. I'm not risking my brain health. I'm not risking injury. I'm not risking, time away from my family. And why would I put the time, the effort, the passion, the love that it takes to do this and follow this sport and cover this sport when the sport itself can't even treat its athletes in a way that we would expect even B-level athletes to be paid, or B-level athletes to be treated, I should say. And so when I woke up on Sunday morning, And I opened Twitter and I had a quick look. The first thing I was actually greeted with, and it was the first thing I tweeted as well. I tweeted it as soon as, because it got to me that much. And I, generally I don't tweet things anymore, but I saw that story. I saw that press conference and my heart just breaks for Tyson Pedro. How can you be in a situation with 11 UFC fights and you don't have enough money to sort of just survive? Now, I understand, right? There's variables here. There are variables that the New Zealand tax system may be more strict than the Vegas system and this and that and the next thing. I understand that. I get that. There's always variables. There's variables of, did Tyson Pedro do the right thing and invest his money wisely when he had opportunities to, and blah, blah, blah. That's all well and good. But this is not a singular story. This isn't a shocking story in that this is not the first fighter that's come out and said something similar to this. This isn't, one of the reasons the UFC love, like when we really peel it back, and it feels like we're doing a mini speaker's corner here, but when we peel it back and we look, why is it that when a fighter, let's say Molly McCann, gets a call and Graham Boylan says to her, you won 50 grand, why does she break down in hysterics? It's not because she's so grateful to have been honored by something. It's the fact that she's a broke fighter. Even at the level of popularity of somebody like Molly McCann, 50 grand can literally change these people's lives. 50 grand. When you're looking at a UFC, even an Apex show that is generating millions of dollars for a company, and 50 grand causes a fighter like a Tyson Pedro or a Molly McCann or whatever to break down in hysterics over. That is a fucking shambles. And everyone in MMA should be ashamed of being complicit in it. Ashamed.
It's a thing, Harry, too, is that, and you said it, it's a problem that all fighters have to take. About 90% of the UFC roster, unless you've maybe worked your way up into a title shot, and even at that, we could argue that champions should be paid a lot better than what they are as well. And it's a thing that is not a lot of fighters have a lot of confidence on, based off the structure of speaking out against the UFC while you're a UFC employee is not going to bode well for you. So that's why we don't hear this more often. Why did we hear it from Tyson Pedro last Saturday night? Well, that's because he's hanging up his gloves. He doesn't have to worry about any repercussions that he may face for speaking out against fighter pay, or speaking out against the level or the structure that UFC operates in as well. And that's a shame as well. And it's that's why a lot of these fighters aren't coming out or don't have the confidence to speak about it. But rest assured, a lot of these fighters are going through the similar enough issues that Tyson Pedro. And, it's thoughts that I struggle with as well. Like, I mean, I have a long, unwavering love for mixed martial arts, but my God, it can be a cruel mistress at the best of times. And it definitely reared its ugly head when Tyson Pedro shared his thoughts and emotions after dropping that decision win to Vitor Petrino. It's a topic I'd love to spend longer on, and maybe one that we can revisit on Speaker's Corner, but we must move on into the next one, Harry. And that was Muhammad Mokaev and Alex Perez in the 125-pound division. Lots of title aspirations on the line here for Muhammad Mokaev, an unbeaten record to maintain. Went out there and put on a level of performance that maybe wasn't to his standard. Spoke about him being unwell. I mean, you woke up to that from Tyson Pedro on Sunday morning. I woke up to a picture of Muhammad Mokaev's toilet full of sick. There's something else that I didn't want to see or need to see. I believe you, Mo. I believe you that you got sick. You don't have to post that shit, man. But nonetheless, Harry, he did enough to get the job done in there on Saturday night against Alex Perez. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So I was actually going to turn it around and ask you the same question, because I asked Spencer this when he and I discussed those fights, and that was, I watched the fight, and I think if I hadn't have known about the 3 staph infections that he had, and then whatever illness caused that horrific picture that everyone has seen at the moment, do I look at that performance in a different way? And I think the answer is yes. Yes, I think I do, actually, because I know what staph infections do for people. I know what it's like to try and recover from a staph infection. Obviously, staph is relatively rife in grappling, and you generally have to take heavy doses of antibiotics, and that really fucks with your system, and it really fucks with your ability to train hard, and your cardio is damaged and all of this stuff. And I looked at that fight and I said, well, the first round is pretty much vintage Mohamed Mokaev. The second and third round, he really falls off a cliff from a cardio perspective, which is just something that we haven't really seen before. But I will.
Yeah, we've seen him slow down. I've definitely seen him slow
down for sure.
And I would say one or two fights, especially in the Charles Johnson fight, I think he definitely significantly slowed down, but he looked flat out gassed in this fight. I think is the difference, really.
Right, and I think the auxiliary point I'm going to add to this, just before we even talk about the fight itself, and then I'll throw it over to you for what your thoughts were on the performance after what we heard. But this seems to be becoming a trend with Mohamed Mokaev, and what I mean by that is, in the last couple of fights, he's performed. However, he's performed whether he's got a finish or not got a finish, and then after the fight, he comes out and he says, "Oh well, just so everyone knows, I was battling with this, or I was battling with this, or I took this injury in, or I took that injury in." And whilst I respect the reality of that, and whilst I respect the realness for Mokaev to come out and say, well, actually, I was dealing with this, this, and this, and I took it in, and I didn't perform as well as I want to because of X, Y, and Z. That becomes, it's seeming to become a habit. And when it becomes a habit, we have to ask some questions as to, is he looking after himself properly in between training camps? Is his training camp looking after him properly enough? Like, is there something happening behind the scenes that Mokaev needs to fix before?
I think the big question is that, should he remain fighting at 125 pounds for a man of his size? Which, when you're draining yourself down and when you're trying to get down to 125, you are weakening the immune system. You are more susceptible to staph infection. You
Right.
are more susceptible to things going wrong on the actual cut. Like, I think him being ill and him being unwell is kind of, me without any medical knowledge or medical history, but I would imagine the sickness came from the rehydration phase after the cut down in weight. And I think that's the big question that I have heading into there, is how long more are we going to be able to see Mohamed Mokaev fight at 125 pounds, and how much is he taken out of his level of ability by trying to get down to 125 pounds, as opposed to maybe not cutting weight and fighting at 135. Like, those are the big kind of ones for me heading in there. And the more and more we see it, it's not going to get any easier for him. He's getting bigger, he's getting stronger, he's growing into his body a little bit. We got to remember, Mohamed is only 23, turning 24 pretty soon. And he's only going to start filling out even more in the coming years as well. And I just don't know how long he can do it. And maybe that's why he's rushing towards the top of the division ever so quickly to try and get it done. But I can't imagine we're going to see Mohamed Mokaev at 125 for too much longer, Harry.
I agree. And I think the thing for me is, I wish somebody, now that the record is gone, I can totally understand if he was chasing the John Jones record. I could totally understand. And frankly, I was on board with, go chase it. Why not?
100%.
Right? Why not? Right? Why not? If you can do it, fucking fair play to you. Fair play to you. But it didn't happen. And that's fine as well. I don't think anyone really expected him to go and break the record. I don't think anyone really thought it was going to happen. But there was a potential because of his age and because of his amateur career and everything else. And so, fair play to him. Go and chase it. Now it's gone. I would like to see somebody get in his ear a little bit and just say, what are we doing this for? Like, what are we doing this at this clip for? You're 23. You should have another 12 years in this sport. That's a lot of fighting. That's a lot of potential title shots. That's a lot of potential big paydays, in relative to the paydays that we've been discussing. But it's also a lot of big nights. A lot of big nights and a lot of big performances to come. And so, do we want to keep draining our body to 125, or do we want to take 6, 7, 8 months out and really get into, like, allow our body to grow a little bit. Because the thing that worries me, just from a human level, is if you stunt your growth just as a human by constantly undereating, constantly dieting, constantly keeping yourself at a certain specific weight in order to make 125, well, what does that do for the rest of your life? Do you know what I mean? Like, you're going to want to allow your body to grow naturally. And as you've said, he looks strong in there. He looks big in there. I don't think that stuff wouldn't translate up to 135 pounds as and when that inevitable time will come. But yeah, I'll just add some thoughts about the actual performance. Like,
yeah, I was going to lead down that way as well. Just talk about the performance itself and what you've seen in there.
so I think people forget that Alex Perez is actually a good fighter because he got wrapped up by Davis Figueiredo really, really quickly, and then he goes out and gets finished in his last one. But I think in this one, we got to see some of the stellar qualities of Alex Perez, which is he really does know how to grapple and grapple pretty well. And, against Davis and Figueiredo, anyone can get got at any one time, right? He's a savage fighter, or at least was in that era. But I was just so impressed with Muhammad's ability to consistently scramble and consistently win the scrambles, because that's not an easy task to do. Scrambling is a skill in and of itself. And where Muhammad Mokaev may not got the perfect level of striking, or even the perfect level of like controlling positions when they do hit the mat, his ability to consistently scramble and consistently win head height and hip height is just beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful to watch. How many fighters would you see that are willing to not cower up, but move themselves up against the fence and then get down on basically into a seated position and just wrestle from there? So few fighters would choose to be there. But because of how tired Mokaev was in that third round, you see him take that. And we've said this before ad nauseum, that when a fighter is reduced in some fashion, whether it's cardio, whether it's damage, whatever it is, you see the bare bones of that fighter. And the fighter that we saw at the very, very bare bones, Muhammad Mokaev, is a scrambler. He's a wrestler. He's a grappler. And we got to see that in bounds over those 3 rounds. Now, one thing that does just scream alarmingly at me is that if we're going to go up and fight Alexander Pantoja, there is going to need to be a seamless camp. There's going to need to be a seamless weight cut. We can't be going in with only 3 rounds of gas, because Pantoja comes in with 5 every single time. We can't be going in with a similar level of striking output that we did in this fight, because Pantoja will eat us alive. I do, however, really want to see the scrambles between them two.
Yeah, the scrambles are going to be good, but not basing it off that performance, but basing it off what we've seen so far overall in the UFC. I don't really give his chances at this very stage too much against Pantoja. Like, let's see him in a 5-round main event. Like, I really don't. It's like, to be honest, look, history is kind of repeating himself in that he's testing himself at these limits, I think, to try and get down to 125. You think that if he goes out there and produces a level of performance that he produced in the 3rd round of that Alex Perez fight, that Pantoja isn't going to eat him alive? I think he is. And that's why I think it stresses the importance of what you said there in, he needs to have a perfect camp going in there. Is the way to go about this fight rush now until June or May for the Brazil card? It's too soon. Coming off 3 staph infections, you're coming off that illness. That's your body telling you something, to be honest. And maybe he just needs that rest, but it'll be interesting to see if it comes. You think title shot next for him, or what do you think?
What do I think will happen, or what do I want to happen?
Well, I'd say you probably give me both.
What do I think will happen is a title shot against Alexander Pantoja.
Yep.
What do I want to happen is Kai Kara France over 5 rounds.
Yep. I'm totally with you. I cannot argue that at all. It's like, I think it's too soon for him now. I think now that the record is gone, what's the rush here? You need to make yourself get into the perfect kind of condition to do this. But maybe he knows obviously a lot more than what we know when it comes to weight, and maybe he wants to rush for a reason, because maybe he sees his time at 125 slipping away as the years go by. But it'll be very interesting. Good to see Alex Perez back after such a long layoff. Like I said, very underrated fighter. Even though he did lose, it was a gutsy performance, a good performance against a guy who really focused on wrestling and grappling, and it's very hard to fight a guy like that when you can't combat it. But uh, he did a good job, I think, to in stages of that, and I think he needs to kind of dust himself off and come back straight away. Is there anyone you'd like to see him fight next?
Yeah, I wanted Brandon Royval. And I know that Brandon Royval just won, but I have no wish to see Brandon Royval chucked into a title shot. I don't think they will do it. So my other option was Brandon Moreno, because again, Brandon Moreno's just lost 2 decisions. I know that they've fought before, but you could do Amir Albazi, because Amir Albazi hasn't had that sort of push yet. But do you want to put Alex Perez with Amir Albazi?
I'd like to see him against Mateus Nicolau, and Nicolau is kind of a guy who has been unfortunate enough, I think, to be kind of left out in the cold here, because even after that last fight, he was supposed to take on Manuel Cape. Cape missed weight or didn't fail to kind of turn up for the fight. He didn't get his opportunities, but he turned up. He was ready. So I'd be giving him the push ahead of Manuel Cape. Give him someone like Alex Perez. Give him a push up. Even give Mateus Nicolau someone like Brandon Royval. I think Nicolau needs that push. I think he's been the forgotten guy in the division, and I think it's unfortunate. He's a victim of circumstance, as they say. But another victim of circumstance was Begsat Alakhan in the 135-pound division, Harry, who last week when we spoke about him had a impressive record of 17-1, now 11-2. This week he was brought through the Sherdog ringer. A couple of the fights weren't classed as full-on MMA fights, had a couple of fights taken off the record, but I can tell you something for nothing. He caused an absolutely huge scare to cousin Umar Nurmagomedov in this fight at the very start, in an exchange, clipped him with a right hand over the top on the temple. And Umar Nurmagomedov was in big trouble, instantly initiated the grappling. And that was, the beginning of the end of this fight, really. Umar Nurmagomedov did not want to engage, and rightfully so, against Alakhan. What are your thoughts on this one? Were you impressed by the UFC debutant? Were you impressed about how Nurmagomedov recovered and showed his dominance and showed his level? And the fact of the matter is as an up and coming fighter, Harry, you need moments like that to kind of correct yourself a little bit too, don't you? So a big, a fight that could have been thrown by the wayside, but one that Nurmagomedov picked up a good solid win, a good decision win, and learned a few lessons, and will bring lots of those lessons into his next fight, whoever that may be against.
Yeah, so I will start with I would like to see him in with the winner of Piotr Jan versus Song Yadong.
You read my mind. We were going backwards on this analysis. Normally we do the matchmaking last, but I'll gladly oblige doing that. I was thinking exactly that. That was what I was going to say. He needs to get like this thing about, him, no one wanting to fight him and everything like that. It must be frustrating, but at the end of the day, there's got to be someone that wants to fight him. At the end of the day, if the UFC come and say you're fighting this guy, whether you like it or not, you're going to be fighting that guy, to be honest, or you're going to be shelved. So I think that fight is next for Umar Nurmagomedov, whoever it may be, that push up the rankings. But I definitely agree with that.
I hope so. And in terms of Alakhan, like, look, he was as impressive as he possibly could have been. I think. I don't think there is anyone in that division that when Umar starts grappling is going to deal with it. I just don't think there is. Maybe if Mokaev goes up at 135 and fills out and does whatever, that will be a really interesting clash of styles. But there's just nobody that has the level of dominance that Umar has in terms of positional control, and then mixing damage and mixing submission offense in that same way. I still think, and I don't say this just because he got clipped even after that, I still think that Umar's striking is not good enough.
Yeah, you said that before the fight as well. So it's
right. Like, I'm not saying that it's bad, and I'm certainly not saying that it should be the level of his grappling, because I think that's going to be very, very difficult. But it needs to be somewhere in the Islam Makhachev range, where he is more than competent on the feet. Should the grappling fail, which as of right now it hasn't failed for either him or Islam Makhachev, but if it fails, if something happens, an injury or whatever, and he doesn't feel like he can grapple, he absolutely needs to be able to rely on his striking. And as of right now, I certainly don't think he can. For Almakhan,
it's the way he got caught. Before you move on to Almakhan, it's like the way he got caught was, not by this tricky kind of shot that Almakhan kind of fit. He got caught rushing and got caught left wide open. And I mean, to be a good striker, it means closing the distance intelligently and defensively and getting yourself into a position where you can attack. But if you start thinking about the attack before you start thinking about the defense under the feet, that's exactly what happens. And what Nurmagomedov kind of suffered in that fight. But please continue about Almakhan.
Yeah, sure. And I think for Almakhan to not get finished, to reverse one of those positions, especially when Umar was on his back and was in mount, he managed to wrestle up from a ton of really, really tough positions. We have something there. For sure, we have something there. I think Umar Nurmagomedov is maybe barring the champion, is maybe one of the toughest UFC debuts you can possibly think about drawing, especially in that weight class. It is absolutely disgraceful, really, that Almakhan was forced to fight Umar Nurmagomedov and that there wasn't anyone else available for him to make a UFC debut on. Yes. But the people that genuinely watch and know the sport know that you go 3 hard rounds with Umar Nurmagomedov, you find yourself reversing certain grappling positions, you find yourself surviving and escaping back control, mount, these sorts of things. You know what's going on. And especially when in that first round you clip him and drop him hard. And yeah,
it was almost like a Makhachev style of fight, wasn't it?
Right. Makhachev in that fight, I think that's actually a perfect analogy, where Makhachev was 1 or 2 steps better than Rozenstruik in that night, and I think it's fair to say that Almakhan was 1 or 2 steps behind cousin Umar in this fight. But keep an eye on this fella.
Yeah, 100%. Nurmagomedov, like Makhachev in that fight against Aryukin, was pushed to their limits. And that's definitely showing some promise for Almakhan. And I'm definitely looking forward to be a guy I'll be keeping an eye on as well. And hopefully he's much better matched up in his second fight. And I think he will be, given, we have a history of this, of fighters coming in and taking chances who are being looked after in the following fights. And I think that's the way it has to be. But what we are going on is a guy who's the severe spotlight was shone on this week, and that's Steve Erceg. Really, really great performance here against Matt Schnell. And I'm going to hand the mic over to you, Harry, to explain why he was the severe spotlight for this week. Just an excellent performance overall.
Yeah, there was a couple of fighters genuinely this week that could have got it. I think notable shout-outs to cousin Umar, notable shout-outs to Christian Leroy Duncan. But the reason that I picked Steve Erceg specifically for this one is all of the shine was on Muhammad Mokaev this week. You wouldn't have even known there was a second flyweight fight happening because the Muhammad Mokaev spotlight wheel was turning. And yet Steve Erceg goes out in what was, let's be honest, Matt Schnell is a dangerous fighter, knows his way around the octagon, has been in plenty of fights before, plenty of wars before. And Steve Erceg absolutely decimated him. And I mean, from start to finish, it was an absolute destruction. And I was just so impressed with Erceg's ability to fight smartly, to take away the game plan of Matt Schnell, to reduce Schnell to just the bare bones of who he is, which is a scrapper. It's a chuck myself in the pocket and try and find a way out. I was so impressed with how Steve Erceg saw the left hook so early, but was then patient enough with it that he could find the shot that came to him rather than try to force the shot. Just unbelievable. Just really, 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 really good performance from Steve Erceg. One that he should be dramatically proud of, and one that I think earns him, or should earn him, a significant step up in the rankings.
Well, there's a lot of argument out there as well that, his performance much better than Mokaev. And, if you're a guy who's looking to want to go in there and put up a good fight, and I think the UFC's fear with Mokaev might be the fact that he might not be able to last the pace, but we've not seen any signs of that from Erceg, because Erceg came in against David Dvorak, performed very well, looked slick, looked smooth on the feet, another good performance in his last fight. And this was exactly the performance and actually the finish that he needed to really catapult himself up the division. And I think we're going to see this guy fight for a title sometime. I really do. If he's matched correctly, I think the timing is right for him to make a good march up the division here. What do you think about that assessment?
So I need to see the grappling. I need to see the grappling because he has not had to use it at all. We saw a couple of sprawls in this one, but that's not what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, I really need to see some actual grappling. I need to see him do some grappling, some proper grappling. Again, he level changed in this fight, mostly just to, I think, show Matt Schnell that there's another area that he's dangerous in. But I need to see some full grappling. I need to see what's he like on top. Can he prioritize damage? What's his positional work like? What's he like on bottom? How easily is he getting reversed? What's his get-up game like? What's the reversal of clinches really like against good grapplers? And so I don't know that I can pin myself on saying he will fight for a UFC title one day. I think the intelligence on the feet, it would not surprise me if it transposed over to the grappling as well, specifically because, in lighter weight classes in the UFC and in MMA just in general, it is absolutely imperative that you can do everything to a high level. And it feels like Steve Erceg is the kind of guy that wouldn't leave stones unturned. But I had two names for Steve Erceg.
Go for it.
One was Matheus Nicolau.
Yeah. I love that. I love that as well. Yeah.
And the other one was Manel Kape.
Yeah, I love both of those. Cape would be the first one that would have sprung to mind to me. It's just like, it's such a fucking risk going in there against Manuel Cape now, because you know what I mean? You put your time into a camp and then the cunt might show up and not make weight. So it's like, it's a kind of a poison chalice going in there against Manuel Cape now. I think he needs to probably get a lower ranked person and prove that he can make that weight again before fighting against high level competition. And yet to the argument that I was talking about with Perez, I think it makes even more sense for Erceg to go in there against Nicolau, both coming off the back of wins, I believe. And I love that fight. I just want to see Matheus Nicolau in the mix again, because I think he deserves it. So good shout there. For Schnell, I mean, anyone, you can put Schnell in him, anyone really, won't he? He's going to make it fun. He's going to make it exciting.
Yeah, Schnell, I think, has realized that he's a fun fighter, but we know the limits. We know the levels of Matt Schnell. He will always be fun. He will always be in great scraps. But we're never going to see him with a 5 or higher ranking against his name. We're just not. He's just not like that. He's just not quite there, and that's fine. It's really important that there are fighters in the sort of the lower third of that ranking that make up and give these other guys opportunities, because if they wouldn't, it wouldn't be a division. So yeah, fair play.
Big time. Let's rattle through the rest of these. I know it's late, Harry. Eric Anders versus Jamie Pickett.
Fucking horrendous. Like,
terrible fight.
I'm not even going to let you talk. Fuck that. Jamie Pickett retired. Fair play to him for retiring. I think, to be honest, fair play to him just because he probably understands that with a record now of almost 50-50, that now's the time to hang it up, that he's just not as competitive as he once was. But for Eric Anders, I mean, Eric Anders getting dropped by Jamie Pickett in that first round, had to really drag it in and take it into where he wanted it to be, which is the grappling. But I mean, it wasn't as awful of a fight as I expected it to be, but it still wasn't a great fight. And you know,
it's hard for me to get invested in a fight like that, to be honest, because we know where Pickett is at in his career. We know where Anders is at. And I do understand as well, like, these fights are going to happen and you are going to get two guys that are just fighting for pay and fighting for pride. And, but yeah, this wasn't a particularly good one. It was pretty, Pickett should have got the job done, didn't get the job done, ended up losing. And it's kind of the epitome of his full-on career. And we wish him all the best in his retirement. And I look forward to seeing his next one at Bare Knuckle FC in a couple of months' time as well.
Shout out
PFL, yeah. Shout out Vinicius Oliveira, who picked up one of the knockouts of the year so far against Bernardo Sopaj in the 135-pound division. Sopaj was good, and then he just blew his wad in this fight. He lost energy and nearly ended up losing his life towards the end when that knee connected. It was an absolutely vicious knockout. It was a brutal knockout, and it's up there for one of the knockouts of the year, but it did come with a level of circumstance, and that level of circumstance was that too much too soon for Sopaj in this, I would think, and his inexperience cost him his cardio. His cardio cost him the fight by getting absolutely knocked out, but he was en route to losing it anyway, in my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Harry.
So I thought Sopaj looked fantastic in the first round. I do think that weight played a factor here. I'd love to know what they were weighing on fight day, because Vinicius Oliveira looked absolutely ginormous for the weight class. And but
also this was also a short notice fight for Sopaj. So I'm wondering, is he in more a natural 125er here?
Right, because he certainly looked smaller, but I thought in the first round he looked fantastic. Gave Oliveira an absolutely hellish 5 minutes on the ground. And then even the first 2.5 minutes of the second round, he sort of did the same thing, but Oliveira found a way back to his feet and really just started churning through the gears. As we move through, before we even get to the knockout, as we move through Vinicius Oliveira's UFC career, it's going to be interesting to see how long he can dine out on that knockout for, because it won't be long until they put him in with a very, very, very real 135-pound fighter. And if the grappling isn't up to scratch, we're going to find out very, very, very quickly. But the finish itself was just beautiful. Right hand comes to a left hook, and the left hook sort of drags Sopaj across the cage. As he bounces away from the fence, he's met with just one of the most disgustingly timed knees that you've seen in a long, long, long time. And yeah, I mean, that certainly didn't need any coffin nails at the end of it, right? Like, that was fucking absolutely finished. A beautiful knockout, a brutal knockout. Certainly one for the end of year awards. But Vinicius Oliveira.
I made the same mistake a couple of times as well. Not the Real Madrid,
not the Real Madrid left winger. No, fair play to him as well. Like, I think Vinicius Oliveira has got a lot to add. He's made almost a bit of a rod for his own back. When you knock someone out like that, the target is almost on your back a little bit. People are like, yeah, give me that guy. I'll take that guy, Shine, no problem. And I'm just going to dive straight in. The name I have is Chris Gutierrez.
I like it. Yeah, give that to him. With Sopaj, it was a tough one. That's a kind of a knockout that could change your career overall. So hopefully he makes a speedy recovery. He comes back, and like I said, Sean said that he wasn't ready for the UFC. I would argue that. Huh?
He definitely is.
I definitely thought before he got tired, he showed a resemblance of a really good fighter and caused Oliveira trouble in the first round, and took the back in the second round and just gassed himself out. And after that, I think he's got a couple of wins inside the octagon for sure. Great fight. Eamon Sabi, Javid Basharat, technical battle on the feet here. I'm just going to go and say it. I thought Basharat was a little bit unlucky not to get the win here. I had it scored 2-1. I had it 29-28. The Basharat judges had it different. I think round 1 was the swing round. I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts on this fight was, and also the scoring of the fight as well, Harry.
So this will tell you how close the fight was, because I thought round 1 was the easiest round to score, and I thought round 2 was the swing round.
Maybe I'm getting mixed up. Don't think
round 1 to me, Basharat looked really, really good with his kicking game.
Oh, yeah. I'm getting mixed up. It was round 2.
Okay, cool. He was doing a good job of managing the distance of Zahabi. He was doing a good job of landing the jab, landing the long right hand, and evading Zahabi's shots really, really nicely. Zahabi, however, was defensively really, really aware. Like, he was only getting caught with the last maybe 2 or 5 shot of the combo, right? So it would maybe be a 1-1-2 and he'd get caught with the 2, or it will be, you know, a 1-2-3-4-5 and then he'd get caught with the 5. Like, it was very rare that he was just getting jabbed up or he was just getting right-handed, which is something that we have seen a lot from Javid Basharat's opponents before this. And then round 2 was just razor close, absolutely razor close. I went back and obviously watched it once, and then I tried to watch it twice, and I still can't tell you who I think won that second round. I initially, as I first watched it, gave it to Basharat, and then I gave Zahabi round 3. But I mean, it's that close that I can't argue with the judges. Again, watching it cage side is very, very different to watching it on television, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad reasons. But I think Zahabi showed some really interesting developments in his game, which is so odd given that he's been in the UFC for so long and the age that he is. And I also think Basharat maybe gave Zahabi a little bit too much respect. But I think the overarching point here, and where this is going to be a real demonstrable problem for Basharat going forward, is...
Can I guess? Lack of power on his strikes?
Exactly.
Is it?
That's exactly the point I was going to make. As you move through these divisions, as you move through the upper echelons of this division, if you don't have power, it's so hard to get respect of those elite level guys. So hard. And Basharat just doesn't have that level of power.
And it's part of the reason why he lost this fight too, in reality. You know what I mean? And we talk about time and time again about fights as well, and the importance of having impactful shots as a part of your arsenal is going to be the winning and losing of a lot of fights now, as people are getting more savvy to how judges are looking at fights and scoring fights as well. Any final thoughts on that? Who would you like to see these guys in against next before we move on?
Yeah, so I have Ayman Zahabi with Said Nurmagomedov.
Mm-hmm.
And I have Basharat sticking around this level, and I've got him with Hani Barcelos.
Yeah, I like that too. I like it too. Also, what I liked was the performance of CLD. Christian Leroy Duncan went out there and got the job done against Claudio Ribeiro. Look at, I'm going to give it one. Hey, remember that guy? Remember that guy? Why didn't he do it? That's the reason that he lost this fight. I think he didn't come out with that hey energy, and CLD just kind of took advantage of that. I think that's the key analysis of this fight. I think we can move on. All right. I know, I'm joking. Look, it was a great performance. I think the fact that he wasn't outspoken, he wasn't brash, is because I think in reality, when Claudio Ribeiro took this fight and was training for this fight, he caught a figure to me walking out to the cage as if he knew something like this was going to happen. And I think he fought like he knew this was going to happen and didn't open up that much. You know, very defense savvy, but it still wasn't good enough. You know, did well enough to kind of steer CLD away from any major trauma in round 1. Didn't get super hurt, but was more so picking them apart. But we got to see a little bit of the grappling of CLD in round 2. And once he got into mount and once he started hammering down elbows and ground and pound, the writing was on the wall here for Claudio Ribeiro. But like I say, with all due respect, I think the writing was on the wall before this fight even started. For stylistically, this was a horrible matchup for Claudio Ribeiro.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question was going to be, could Claudio Ribeiro land big shots and then take him down? And the answer was absolutely not.
It's the opposite.
Right. I think somebody put up a tweet that got to the broadcast, and I think that it just encapsulated it perfectly. I apologize dramatically for whoever it is. I forgot who it was, but it just said, this is a heavy bag session for Christian Leroy Duncan. And that's literally what it was. That was absolutely what it was. It was 5 minutes on a heavy bag and then a bit of a ground and pound session with the grappling dummy that you chuck on the floor. That's what we saw here. Like, Claudio Ribeiro just got beaten absolutely everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. I was really impressed to see a little bit of the grappling, not just because the takedown was nice and it was high amplitude and it looked pretty, but Leroy Duncan immediately into side control, wasted no time getting into mount. And from mount, again, what you see a lot of guys do is they just start posturing up and landing shots. He controlled and isolated one of Ribeiro's arms and then went to work, knowing that if Ribeiro wanted to escape the mount position, he was going to have one of two choices. The first was to use the secondary hand to free and strip Christian Leroy Duncan's grip. Well, that means in that time, he's going to get smacked in the face a lot. Or he is going to have to use that hand to start to turn and give his back. And if he turns and gives his back, we know what happens. Leroy Duncan bridges down through the hips and then lands even more shots. And so Ribeiro, I think, knew that his fate was sealed. And we saw what we saw, but just over and away, okay, Ribeiro is not an amazing fighter. He's certainly not going to be winning any titles, but you can only beat what's in front of you. And Christian Leroy Duncan absolutely fucking decimated who was in front of him.
Who next?
So I got two names. One is a big push. One is a slightly less big push, but it is a big test. So the big push is Andre Muniz.
Like it.
The less of a big push, but a big test is Rodolfo Vieira.
I like both of those fights. I would add, just out of the sheer madness of the possibility of the fight, we have Michel Pereira versus Michael Rozenstruik. If the expectation would be Pereira might get through there, you think someone?
I think Leroy Duncan fucking destroys both of them.
Oh yeah, well, I'm not even interested in Rozenstruik if Rozenstruik wins that fight. I think maybe with Pereira, if Pereira goes out and destroys him, I'd be like to see the striking battle between the two of those two, kind of out there unorthodox strikers. But that's just a small push. Like, I mean, like I'm all for giving CLD more of a bigger push up that division, to be honest.
I need to see him against a good grappler. That's what I need to see. And Rodolfo Vieira looked like he had improved his fundamental striking in his last performance, and we know the grappling is fantastic. Andre Muniz, again, striking isn't amazing, but we know that he can do the grappling. And so I need to see a name that can grapple, and then let's see.
Yep, 100%. 100%. Ludovic Klein took on a short notice opponent in AJ Cunningham, 155-pound division, secured a lovely TKO in the first round or front kick to the body, but there was a lot of accumulative damage before that front kick to the body that really got the job done for Ludovic Klein, and another good performance from him too, Harry.
Yeah, another good performance. Again, I need to see Klein. Obviously, this is not his fault that he was fighting AJ Cunningham, but I need to see Ludovic Klein in against somebody that's either a far higher profile or is just a much stiffer test. I gave him Radzhabov just because they're both 155 pounds, and I think Radzhabov is a good fighter. And before we get to Radzhabov's performance with Ludovic Klein, again, it's one of those where when he's on, he looks unbelievable. He's a massive hitter. He's a very vicious hitter. He's a very varied striker. Sorry, it's 2 a.m. here.
I know. All forgiven here, son.
He's a very, very varied striker, and that brings like a real level of entertainment value when I watch him. He destroys the body with loads of different types of shots. The angles up top come from really, really interesting sort of angles and that sort of stuff. And so he's a fun fighter to watch, but I need to see, can he do it against somebody that's actually good? Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And look, he was in there with Joel Alvarez. That fight fell off. And I mean,
that would have been a fantastic fight.
Yeah, and it was like the reason that it was visa issues. So maybe let's bring that fight to a European card and let's make it happen. I mean, that's what I'd love to see. You mentioned Radzhabov. He picked up a good knockout win over Al-Selwady, Abdul Karim Al-Selwady, to be precise. A good fight, exciting fight to get the card kicked off. Yep. Lots of over and back. Both of these fighters won and lost this fight in the course of the 3 minutes, or the 3 rounds, I should say, that they fought. And it was at the start of the 3 round, Radzhabov Radzhabov, who did get the big right hook, landed some vicious ground and pound and put an end to this fight. But an exciting fight, and I think it does set up an interesting fight for Radzhabov in the future. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Radzhabov started too slowly. And I thought El-Selwady started nice and quick. I think El-Selwady is too small for this division. There was again a demonstrable difference in size, and that was also sort of a thing that came around the card, like a storyline that ran through the card for me, is that just some of these fighters are just absolutely fucking ginormous in comparison to their opponents, and
there's a lot of fighters that come in and realize that there is a bantamweight division, and then there's a UFC bantamweight division, or a regional bantamweight division, and an upper echelon, a Bellator, PFL, UFC style kind of bantamweight division where these guys are monstrous. Well,
you look at George Hardwick, right?
Yeah.
If you go and look at the physique difference between George Hardwick in the last 6 months or the last 8 months, it's insane. And I think he realized it too. He went into Cage Warriors and he just looked like a fighter. Now he's got massive back, big wide lats. And I think that comes from you go in and you fight somebody like El-Selwady, who was bigger than you on that night. And then El-Selwady goes in and he fights Radzhabov, who's just fucking massive in comparison. And I think George Hardwick learned his lesson, and I'm sure that others will learn their lesson too. Look, I don't think it's a good thing for the sport, right? I think that the weight cutting, we've talked about this ad nauseum.
You took a deep breath as if you didn't want to get into it. It is 2 in the morning. Yeah, I know.
But we know my feelings on weight cutting, 100%. And so it's not a great thing for the sport, but it also is a reality of our sport. And so where we are with El-Selwady, whether it's George Hardwick coming in or whether it's Radzhabov or whatever it is, we are in a position where these guys, they just have to contend with what they have to contend with, right? And over and back, I've strayed away. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I did stray away.
It's all good.
I just think that Radzhabov's a solid fighter. I just think he's a solid fighter, and I'm interested to see his UFC career.
That's it. Huxley's gone to bed. It's time for Harry Powell to go to bed. It's time to wrap up the balance breakdown for this week at BJJ_Harry Powell at O'Neill MMA. Head over there, and also, like I said at the start, check out Balance Grappling on Instagram and check out some of Harry's stuff. His breakdowns on pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a sport are just as good as his breakdowns of mixed martial arts. So if that's what you tickles your fancy, definitely head over there. We'll be back later on this week. Severe setup, full UFC 299 breakdown. Cannot wait for that card. Cannot wait to break down that card with Harry and with Johnny Sheehan. We'll be back on Thursday for that. Take care. We'll talk to you then.